Most of us are taught to think of happiness as something that will begin once life is arranged correctly. Once we have enough money, enough security, the right relationship, the right work, or some clearer sense of who we are, the mind will finally settle. Nothing important will be missing, and we will at last enjoy the life we have created. But happiness rarely behaves this way. The traditions commonly grouped under Eastern philosophy approach the problem from very different directions. Taken together, they invite an uncomfortable question. Could the way we pursue happiness be part of what keeps us dissatisfied? Buddhism, Daoism, Confucianism, and the philosophy of the Bhagavad Gita do not share one definition of happiness, but each challenges something we take for granted about desire, control, identity, success, and what it means to live well. Here are 8 ideas that offer a different way of thinking about happiness. Number 1. Desire does not end when it is satisfied. We often imagine desire as a problem that will disappear once we get what we want, but usually it does not disappear. It simply changes its object. The promotion arrives and soon becomes normal. The new possession loses its novelty. The relationship we longed for begins to carry new expectations and fears. Satisfaction is real, but it rarely creates the lasting sense of completion we imagined. In the Buddha's teaching of the Four Noble Truths, craving is identified as a central cause of dukkha, a term commonly translated as suffering or unsatisfactoriness. This does not mean that every wish or aspiration is wrong. The problem is tanha, usually translated as craving or thirst, the restless demand that obtaining something must finally complete us, or that an unwanted part of life must disappear before we can be at peace. Even when craving is satisfied, the relief is temporary. The mind adjusts, another desire appears, or we become anxious about losing what we gained. The Buddhist argument is not that pleasure, love, or achievement have no value. It is that none can permanently end the search for satisfaction when the search itself remains unchanged. And even when we find something that genuinely makes us happy, nothing we gain remains the same forever. Number 2. Everything you love will change. In Buddhism, impermanence is expressed through the idea of anicca. Everything that arises through causes and conditions is subject to change. Bodies age, emotions pass, circumstances shift, and even our closest relationships change over time. We understand this intellectually, yet much of our suffering comes from living as though certain things should be exempt. We want youth without aging, love without the possibility of loss, success without decline, and happiness without interruption. When life changes, we experience not only the pain of what happened, but also the pain of believing that it should not have happened. Impermanence does not mean that we should stop loving people or enjoying life. A moment does not become meaningless simply because it cannot last. The point is that lasting peace cannot be built on the demand that changing things remain unchanged. Recognizing this may even alter how we value what is present. A relationship, a period of health, or an ordinary day becomes more significant when we understand that it is not guaranteed to remain. But if change cannot be prevented, how much of life can we really control by pushing harder? When life refuses to follow our plans, the usual response is to apply more force. We work harder, think longer, and try to control every detail. Sometimes that is necessary. But there are situations in which greater effort creates greater resistance. You cannot force yourself to fall asleep. You cannot command another person to love you. When creativity disappears, concentrating on it more intensely can make the mind feel even more blocked. Daoist philosophy explores this through Wu Wei, often translated as non-action or effortless action. It does not mean passivity. It describes action that does not force a situation beyond what its conditions allow. The Tao Te Ching repeatedly uses water as an image. Water is soft and yielding. It does not confront every obstacle directly, yet it continues moving and adapts to its surroundings. The Daoist lesson is not that effort is always harmful. It is that force and effectiveness are not the same thing. We can become so determined to make life conform to our expectations that we stop noticing what the situation actually permits. Sometimes the wiser action is not to abandon the goal, but to stop fighting reality long enough to find another route towards it. Yet this determination often rests on another assumption, that we already know what a successful life should look like. Number 4, your idea of a good life may not be your own. Most people do not invent their own definition of success. They inherit it from the world around them. Achievement, recognition, productivity, usefulness, and the approval of others. A life that does not fit these standards can easily appear wasted, even to the person living it. The ancient Daoist text, known as the Zhuangzi, repeatedly questions whether these judgments are as certain as they seem. In one of its best-known stories, a carpenter encounters an enormous tree whose wood he considers unsuitable for any practical purpose. Yet that uselessness is precisely what has allowed the tree to survive. Other trees are cut down because people can make something from them. This one remains because it offers them nothing they want. The point is not that usefulness is bad. It is that usefulness is not an absolute measure of value. A path that earns little admiration may allow someone to live according to their own nature, while a life praised by everyone else may leave them exhausted or trapped. Zhuangzi does not offer a formula for happiness. He unsettles our confidence in the standards by which we judge it. Before deciding that your life is lacking, it may be worth asking whether the life you are comparing it with is one you ever truly wanted. 5. You are not a fixed self. Most of us carry an idea of who we are. We may see ourselves as intelligent, successful, independent, responsible, or strong. These identities give life continuity, but they can also become something we feel compelled to defend. Buddhism challenges the belief that beneath our changing experiences, there is a permanent, unchanging self. In an early discourse, the Buddha examines the body, feelings, perceptions, mental formations, and consciousness. Each changes, each can become a source of suffering, and none remains completely under our control. For this reason, none can securely be treated as a permanent self. This does not mean that people do not exist in an ordinary sense. It means that what we call the self is not a fixed essence standing apart from experience. Our bodies change, beliefs develop, memories fade, emotions pass, and different circumstances bring out different parts of our personality. Yet we often cling to one description of ourselves as though it must remain true forever. Someone who identifies as successful may experience failure as a threat to who they are. Someone who has always been strong may struggle to accept vulnerability. Recognizing that the self is not fixed does not erase the person. It loosens the hold of the stories we feel obliged to preserve. And while we protect the person we believe ourselves to be, our attention is often somewhere other than the life we are living. 6. You can spend your whole life somewhere else. It is possible to be present for your life without ever fully experiencing it. While eating, we think about work. While working, we imagine finally being able to rest. When rest arrives, the mind begins preparing for tomorrow. The present becomes little more than a passage between the past we cannot change and the future we cannot control. Zen Buddhism attempts to interrupt this habitual absence. Through practices such as zazen, or seated meditation, the practitioner remains attentive to experience without continually following every thought, judgment, or desire that appears. Zen is not simply a philosophy of living in the moment, and it should not be reduced to a technique for feeling calmer. Its deeper concern is awakening, seeing through the habitual divisions and attachments that shape our experience. In the teachings of the Zen master Dogen, practice is not confined to meditation. Ordinary activities can also become part of the path when carried out with undivided attention. No future achievement can compensate for a life continually overlooked while it is happening. If the mind is always waiting for the next moment to become more satisfying, it repeats the same pattern wherever it arrives. The problem may not always be that ordinary life contains too little. Sometimes we are simply too absent to encounter what is already there. 7. You can act without owning the outcome. Much of our anxiety comes from trying to control what happens after we act. We want certainty that our work will succeed, our choices will be rewarded, and our efforts will lead to the future we imagined. When certainty is impossible, we may hesitate, overthink, or avoid acting altogether. The Bhagavad Gita approaches this through the relationship between action and its results. At the beginning of the text, the warrior Arjuna is paralyzed by a moral crisis. Facing members of his own family and former teachers on the battlefield, he no longer knows whether he can perform the duty expected of him. Krishna teaches that a person is responsible for action but should not become attached to its fruits. This is not indifference to consequences. Arjuna's crisis is precisely about the consequences of what he is being asked to do. Attachment to the result can distort the action itself. We may act only when success seems guaranteed, abandon what matters when recognition does not arrive, or judge everything by the reward it produces. The Gita asks for disciplined involvement while maintaining equanimity towards success and failure. The final result is never produced by our effort alone. It also depends on other people, circumstances, and forces we cannot command. Detachment does not guarantee success or remove disappointment. It allows us to act without making success the only measure of whether the action was worthwhile. Number 8. Happiness is not something you create alone. Modern ideas of happiness often focus on the individual. We are encouraged to discover what we want, protect our independence, and create a personally fulfilling life. Other people may contribute to that happiness, but it is still imagined as something that exists primarily within us. Confucian philosophy begins from a different picture of human life. We do not first become complete individuals and then enter relationships. From the beginning, we are shaped through our roles as children, parents, siblings, friends, partners, and members of a community. For Confucius, becoming a good person required the cultivation of Ren, commonly translated as humanness or benevolence. But Ren had to become visible in the way a person treated others. Confucian philosophy also emphasizes Li, the rituals and appropriate forms of conduct through which respect is expressed. This includes formal ceremonies, but also ordinary behavior, how we speak, listen, respond, and fulfill our responsibilities. Character is formed through repeated interaction. We become trustworthy by keeping commitments, considerate by noticing others, and humane by practicing humanity in actual relationships. This does not mean satisfying everyone or sacrificing ourselves without limit. Confucian relationships involve responsibilities in more than one direction. But Confucianism challenges the idea that freedom from responsibility is the highest form of fulfillment. A person may possess comfort, independence, and success, yet still lack trust, belonging, and meaningful participation in the lives of others. From this perspective, happiness is not simply an emotion contained within an isolated self. It is partly created through the quality of the relationships in which a life takes shape. Perhaps happiness is not something waiting for us once life has been arranged correctly. There may never be a point at which every desire is satisfied, every relationship is secure, every decision leads to the right outcome, and nothing important can be lost. The attempt to reach that condition may be part of what keeps happiness permanently out of reach. A different possibility is to stop treating happiness as the final reward for gaining control over life. It may depend less on possessing the right circumstances and more on how we meet circumstances that will always remain uncertain, changing, and partly beyond us. Not a permanent feeling, not a life without difficulty, but a way of living that is no longer postponed until everything becomes perfect. If you found value in this video, don't forget to like it, hype it, share it, and subscribe. It genuinely helps the channel and supports future videos like this as we continue exploring some of the most fascinating ideas, thinkers, and questions about human life. Thank you very much for watching.